So it is with great pleasure that I am able to come here today on this very auspicious day of my very dear godbrother, His Holiness Jayapataka Swami Maharaj's Vyasa Puja celebration. I thought that I would just speak briefly a few points. First of all, about how I first met him. As you know, Srila Jayapataka Maharaj joined ISKCON in San Francisco. So I was in that temple at the time when he first arrived. I think it may have been on a Friday, Thursday or a Friday, because I recall that we were about to celebrate Rath Yatra in San Francisco. This was 1968. And in those days, very few devotees would shave their heads. Maybe only 3 or 4 or 5 devotees in all of ISKCON had a shaved head. But as soon as he came to the temple and he heard that there was a big festival, he immediately shaved his head. And I was very struck by this. But what struck me even more was that on Saturday or Sunday, when the Rath Yatra took place, there he was in the front of the Rath cart, and he was personally the one who pulled the cart the whole distance. I think that he and Jayananda Prabhu together took the cart and they pulled the whole time. So I remember this very striking image of seeing him with a freshly shaved head. At that time he was very thin. And you know, with very fixed determination, pulling Lord Jagannath for many miles down the streets of San Francisco through the park, and then the next morning he disappeared. Where did he go? He went and flew immediately. He had found out that Srila Prabhupada was in Montreal, Canada, and he immediately took a plane and went to Montreal to see Prabhupada. Now this was also very unusual because, as you know, anyone who joins the movement, usually they cannot immediately see the spiritual master. But he, not only did he go to see Srila Prabhupada, but we received a phone call informing us that as soon as he arrived, Prabhupada made him sit down with him and take prasadam with him. So, all of these things prove and demonstrate that he is not an ordinary person, because these events don't take place in the life of an ordinary person. It means that in previous times, he was already engaged in so many devotional activities for the Supreme Lord. And so, at the proper time, when Lord Chaitanya desired Prabhupada came to the West, then immediately he took up Krishna consciousness exactly where he had left in his previous life. Then we heard that he got the name Jayapataka Das, which is the flag of victory. And how it was a flag of victory, gradually we have seen over the years. He became the temple president in Montreal, and then he came to India. He wanted to go to India, and Prabhupada sent him there. Perhaps I think Prabhupada wanted someone to be in India with him. The only other Western devotee at that time, Achyutananda Swami. So Jayapataka Maharaj came to Calcutta, and began to preach with the Judananda Swami at that time, and he immediately began to learn Bengali. Actually, I recall that he came, what month was that? July of 1970? July of 1970. So in August of 70 or 69? 70. So in August of 1970, Srila Prabhupada decided to come to India with a group of sannyasis and myself. At that time I was not a sannyasi. And Madhavisa, who led the kirtan this morning, I think it was him, I heard from my room. He was a sannyasi at that time, so the roles have become reversed. And he was also on the party, and we stopped in Japan, and I will just mention that was a time when we also observed Prabhupada's Vyas Puj. At that time we did not know that this is how you observe Vyas Puj. Prabhupada came into the small little room that was a temple in Tokyo, and he sat down and he said, now you can observe Vyas Puja. So we said, well, we're not sure what to do. So Prabhupada said, well, where are the pushpa? So I didn't know what pushpa meant. I thought that Prabhupada said, where is the pushpanya rice? So I immediately said, we don't have any of that. And I rushed into the kitchen. I said, cook pushpanya rice immediately. And then Prabhupada said, where is the arti paraphernalia? We said, we don't have any. We don't have anything. The Prabhupada became so angry that he said, this is not Vyas Puja. He got out and he walked right out of the temple. So then that evening he called us and he said, this is how you observe it, and just as you are doing, even nicely how you have learned everything, because this is exactly how Prabhupada wanted that the representative of Srila Vyas in the cyclic succession should be worshipped. So the next day we performed it. Anyway, we came on to Calcutta, and we were preaching together with Jayapataka Maharaj, Madhavisa also. At that time, Prabhupada gave Madhavisa the name, he gave him the title, Sankirtan Samrat. I think you have seen this morning why Prabhupada gave him that name, Samrat. So we were preaching here in Calcutta, and of course, Jayapataka Maharaj took a very leading role. He became the temple president of Calcutta, and he and I had many pastimes together. I was his GBC man. You can imagine what it was like for him. Not for me, it was difficult enough for him, but he tolerated. And even others also tolerated. Our Yadubara and Vishaka, they were also there at that time in the Calcutta temple. So after a while, we got some land here in Mayapur, and Jayapataka Maharaj began to come here and to help develop the Mayapur project. So that is a few memories from the back in the old times. I see that by the activities which Jayapataka Maharaj has performed, that really Prabhupada once wrote that my Guru Maharaj has sent all of you to assist me. So I see practically how that is certainly true in the case of my dear godbrother. I feel that he has a very wonderful sense of history. He knows what the previous acharyas have desired. Just as, for example, Lord Nityananda Prabhu described a grand temple to be built here in Mayapur. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur described the parikrama, Navaduit parikrama, which Nityananda Prabhu took Jiva Goswami on. And he also developed the Namhat preaching. And I see how Jayapataka Maharaj has placed himself very instrumentally in the hands of the previous acharyas to be able to fulfill all of these very important visions which they had. Actually, it's not by chance. Sometimes people say, well, it's just someone's good luck that they joined the movement at the right time, or something of this type. But I don't think it is a case like that. I think that it is a case that some people have a sense of wanting to serve the desires of the spiritual master and the previous acharyas. And they are utilized by Guru and Krishna in wonderful ways. Just how devoted Jayapataka Maharaj is to Srila Prabhupada, and how dependent he is, was demonstrated to me when he received that very unfortunate attack in Spain. I came to visit him in his hospital room. I think our Bangalore president was there. Is he here now? Madhu Pandit was there also. So, Jayapataka Maharaj was lying in the hospital bed, and this was about 3 or 4 days after the wound that he had received. And he said to me at that time, he said, Swami Krishna Maharaj, I was wondering if you could chant on a Brahmin thread, because I want to get the thread from someone who is connected to having received it from Prabhupada. Because his thread had been cut, because it was so encased with blood, they cut it off. But he didn't just take another thread and put it on and begin chanting Gayatri. But not until he could get the thread which was chanted on and connected to Prabhupada did he agree to take another thread. I thought this is it has always remained in my mind how totally dependent and attached he is to Srila Prabhupada. And it was seen in even in a simple act like this, because ordinarily anyone might have just said, well, the other thread is gone, and put on another thread and begun chanting. But he didn't do that, because he's so thoughtful. And that thoughtfulness is seen by everyone, especially I think his godbrothers appreciate how thoughtful he is. Sometimes he's so thoughtful that it takes him many minutes even to respond. If we ask him a question, he'll sit there. But it's not as if he thinks very deeply. And those deep thoughts are reflected, for example, in our GDC meetings. So many of ISKCON's legislation, the laws of ISKCON which govern our society, are actually proposals which he has put forward. And sometimes I am astounded by it, how he can be so thoughtful about how the movement is governed. But again, it is because of the direction that he received from Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada told him that he told Jayapataka Maharaj and a few of us here in Mayapur that we should study the big religions and institutions of the world and model our governing of ISKCON after them. So he's always a very strong defender and protector of ISKCON, not only by the legislation which he introduces in our body of the GBC, but by his preaching. His preaching is so wonderful. When I was here a few years ago, it was the Janmashtami day. I don't remember, maybe 5 years ago. And I was sitting here, and we were expecting Jayapataka Maharaj to come. And he came. He came at about 11 o'clock in the morning, because he had come from Calcutta, where he had given a Janmashtami lecture. Then he came here, gave a long lecture, he performed a very nice initiation ceremony, and then drove back to Calcutta and flew to Madras and did a large preaching pandal that night in Madras. So, in one day, preaching in 3 cities, just like I know myself, I was just here, and I was, very attached to just staying in Mayapur and chanting 64 rounds. I think Narendra and I were doing a Dandavat Parikrama around the temple room, but he was absorbed in preaching. And we've always seen how absorbed he is in preaching. When we go on the parikrama, when we hear about his international schedule, he's tirelessly preaching, to the point where I think that practically there's nobody who equals the strength and vigor in which he preaches in all of ISKCON. I honestly can say that. I don't think anyone has so much energy to preach and show so much enthusiasm to preaching as he personally does. So on this day, I am requesting him that I always think of him. I feel protected by him because he is such a strong pillar in our ISKCON society. I request him that he should always kindly look after my well-being. All of his disciples, I also pray to all of you that you be very kind. I feel you're all very advanced souls, and I pray for your protection and kindness upon me as well. So I thank you very much for allowing me to come here today. I hope that you will forgive me if I go as quickly as I came, because I'm in the middle of writing and I don't want to lose all the thoughts that I had. So I thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Just want to take this opportunity to say a few words of gratitude and appreciation to all my God brothers for all the tolerance that they have had in tolerating all my offenses or harsh or unconscious activities. Actually, they've been always so kind to give me a good association, and by nature I'm a bit stubborn, so sometimes if I'm doing something it's hard for me to just change. But still they always very merciful, and they're always reminding me of Srila Prabhupada in so many ways. All the disciples can see how wonderful this Krishna conscious family is, where everyone is working together to serve His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada mentioned that he went to the West, and that if anyone else had gone alone like that, they probably would have fallen down, they wouldn't have made it. So Prabhupada was so kind for our protection, he gave us this society, this spiritual family. I'm especially very grateful for His Holiness Tamala Krishna Maharaj. For so many years has off and on been giving me very valuable association. And he's a pillar in Krishna consciousness. I'm very grateful for Bhakti Chuda Swami Maharaj and Subhag Maharaj, Janani Bas, Pankajangri, Bhakti Vidya Purna Maharaj, all the other God Brothers Association. Actually, we're trying to do something for Srila Prabhupada, but it's ludicrous that anyone thinks they can do it alone. Actually, the only way we can do something is if unitedly work together to do something. And so the fact that they're tolerating all my bad qualities and still working with me is their unlimited ocean of good qualities that they have. And I hope that they will forgive not only myself but my disciples in case, or me, for any offense made by my disciples who in their enthusiasm or ignorance sometimes also make mistakes. So all glories to the disciples of His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki.
So to get free